You know the game. You know the rules. You have a group, and you've jotted down some plot notes, but you want to change up the game from its usual setting. You sit down with pen and paper, or more realistically, keyboard and screen, ready to start writing out where your players will be adventuring. What's it like on this world they live on? Where within the setting do you start them out? We'll be answering these questions and more tonight, and in later episodes, on Playing God. If you're joining us for the first time, I'm Nick Logie, and sitting silently in the corner is Xander. Are you sure you want to do that, Nolan?
Hey, man.
All right, Xander, we got a big topic that can't be contained in one episode.
So, we're just going to have to break it down in as many small pieces as we need to.
That's right. Designing a world can actually be really simple. What we're here for is to give you the tools you might need to make your perfect universe. Let's jump right into the first topic in our series. Xander, why don't you give us a rundown of what we're doing this time?
Well, the first bullet point is the difference between creating a world top-down or bottom-up. Each GM the world over has the way that they like to do things. They have a means by which creates the most fleshed-out universe for them. Nick, for example, is a bottom-up kind of guy. I prefer top-down. For the purposes of this particular podcast, we're going to go into a couple of different aspects for both top-down and bottom-up. But to answer the question, first, what is top-down and bottom-up? The top-down formation is where you start with the big picture, the gods, the cosmos, how big is your universe, what kind of like, is it a planet, is it a disk floating in space, and nothing is on your planet or disk, and you go top down. Bottom up, however, is the reverse of that. You start with a very small town, maybe a building, or perhaps even just a room, and you build up your universe from that micro point in your cosmos. So the first thing that we have to do before you can do anything else is decide how big your universe is going to be.
This will help you determine which of these methods you even want to use to start with. We're going to be obviously focusing on bottom up simply because it's a little easier to comprehend, and this way we can kind of build a world together in real time. So the reason why you want to start off deciding how big you want the universe to be is because if you're running a big epic campaign that spans like continents and everything, then you're going to want to have everything fleshed out for like at least the continent size. But if your entire campaign, or maybe you're only doing a one shot, takes place in one city, then you don't necessarily need to have anything beyond the scope of that city. You don't need to worry about other countries if they're not relevant to your story. You don't need to worry about other planets or even the gods if they're just not going to be a real big part of what you're doing.
Yeah, so the reason why we are going to be looking at bottom up is because if you're watching this on YouTube, you will see in front of you a screen, and that screen is being recorded by Nick somewhere out in the cosmos through an application that we call Roll20. Roll20.net is a wonderful tool. They're not paying us to say this. We just really enjoy using it. It's brought us together. We live in very separate places. He lives in Georgia. I live in Illinois. So the easiest way that we can play our games together is by using an application like Roll20. And so we're going to start out building this world using this application. And we're going to start
I'm actually
with
not on
Roll20,
Roll20, Xander. I'm in
you're
Microsoft
not?
Word. I'm literally writing out bullet points of what we're doing.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Well, you can nix that part, I guess.
No, you still should use Roll20 because it's it's a great way to show tokens and like have little grids and be able to communicate with players over vast distances very easily. It has like built-in voice and all sorts of things you could do with it. But for the purposes of this, we're just going to be writing down what we're going to build because we're actually going to build from bottom up in this episode some amount of our universe, and then we'll continue it on in later episodes.
And if you're listening to this on Podomatic, you will not have the benefit of seeing the Word document, not Roll20, the Word document that Nick is operating. So if you want to, head on over to our page and check us out on YouTube as well.
And we'll be doing our best to elaborate what I'm actually typing out. So that way you might not necessarily need to see it firsthand, but if you want to keep track of what we're doing as we're doing it, then you can definitely shoot on over to YouTube.
So the first thing that we're going to do, how big should our universe be, Nick?
Well, since we're going to be doing bottom up, then how about let's just make it let's do one country. That's what our theoretical scope for this campaign is. We're only going to be adventuring in one place, in one time, and that's it.
All right. Sounds good to me. So, since we're doing bottom up, one of the first things that you think of is, where is this place? Like, what kind of place is it? Is this a nation that is a desert? Is it lush green forests? Is it rolling hills and fields?
Well,
is it mountainous?
let's actually scale this down even further. It doesn't matter what the rest of the country looks like. What is the 50-foot square area that your house is in? What does that terrain look like?
Oh, wow.
Because a country can hold a ton of terrain. Even our own in the U.S. has a vast amount, just, even going, to some degree, going down the road.
Yeah, I suppose that's fair. See, now you can see the disconnect between Nick and I. I prefer top-down, and you prefer bottom-up.
Indeed. So, all right, so since you like the top-down stuff, and I like the bottom-up stuff, I'll start us off. All right, we have a tavern. That's where we're starting at. That's where we've decided that we want the players to start, because this is Dungeons and Dragons, we're gonna say, and you gotta have that tavern. You gotta have. Let's start. We could start smaller. We could start at that shadowy corner that all the adventurers hang out in. So.
Oh yeah, the trope. The trope is real.
That's right. So let's talk about this tavern. How about Rolling Plains? That was one of the examples that you mentioned, and so that's the area around this place.
All right, cool. So we've got a Rolling Plains kind of place.
So let's start with, how big is the tavern? Is this like a bustling tavern? Is this maybe like this is just its own thing on the side of the road, like in the middle of kind of like a gas station on the way to another city?
Well, since we're doing bottom up rather, let's go with it's just a small little kind of hole in the wall place, 4 or 5 miles out from a city where adventurers go to stop before their adventures really begin.
All right, sounds great. All right, so before we start getting into making NPCs and that kind of thing, because that involves going kind of more deeper with the person that you're making. They have their motivations and what their goals are and what they want to do, and what they need to do for the game, more importantly, in your setting. So let's go with the road leading up to this place. Is this something that everyone knows about, or is this do you have to go off the beaten path? Is this something that you're going down a main cobblestone road towards a big city, and you look off to the side and you see it in the distance, you're like, huh, what's that little building? Or is this like, come to this tavern so we can, because everyone loves coming here. We're the last stop between here and whatever else you're going to.
It's actually hard for me to pick. I'd say,
I think for ease, we should just go with, this is just on the road and it's a frequent stop for most adventurers, because then you have you have an easy plot hook, because if whoever you need to be there is probably already there. So if you need another group of adventurers that aren't your players to be there, then you could just insert them and it won't be weird. If you just want to start with your own players, then that could explain why they're there to begin with. Because they're just there for the night to rest up, feed their horses, fix their equipment or whatever, and then move on out the next morning.
All right, sounds good. Well, now we've got the place, and we have the general feel for the location. What kind of building is it? Is it a 2-story inn with rooms on top and the tavern on bottom? Is it just a tavern with no rooms that when the sun comes up, you're expected to get the fuck out? kind of place.
Well, we can
Um,
actually start thinking about like plot hooks now, because now that we have an idea of what this place is, we can go into the not the full next stage, but think about why you would want this building to have certain things. Maybe it's a one-story building that actually has all of its rooms below ground,
ooh,
in a basement.
nice.
So you gotta like go down a staircase to get there, and maybe that also explains why when their party stays there for the first night, ant kegs burst from the walls.
Oh, nice. Very nice. I could dig it. So,
So it's
it's
technically a
a
two-story building, but
it's
the
just
bottom
upside
story is
down.
hidden.
It's a two-story building upside down. All right, so we have a basement where all the rooms are, and we have the bar upstairs where adventurers come to drink, be merry, swap stories, listen to the bard, do some cool stuff on stage. So
And
I guess
since this is gonna be our like our opening scene pretty much for this theoretical campaign, what I usually like to do with the first place that I do is I like to elaborate on how it looks internally before I do anything else. So that way, when you present this place to your players, it already feels fleshed out, and they could just go and interact and just start playing the game. So we have like the main tavern. Does it have maybe just a regular old warm hearth that you can sit next to, or does it have something crazy like there's in the middle of the room there's this huge brazier that is just like burning a purple fire?
ooh, see that sounds cool.
That sounds interesting. That sounds like players will be like, is that magical, or is that some kind of scientific trick that the uh, establishment has?
Hmm. And that could also help ease the players into the idea that you might be running a campaign that has a lot of magic, and that just a regular old tavern owner happens to have a purple flame that never goes out sitting in the middle of their bar because it's that common and it wasn't even expensive to buy. Or if it's a trick using like magnesium powder or something like that in a regular fire to change its color. So it's not magic, it's science.
That's a
Magic is very
great
rare.
point, Xander. I didn't even think of that. You actually can establish the level of magic in your campaign from the very first description. Because if they do because you're right, if they do find out this is a magical fire that just a random tavern out in these rolling plains has access to, then that actually sets a good tone for how common magic items and just general interaction with magic can be. Maybe you even have like a wizard there, which normally in like a low magic setting would be a rare occurrence. But since you've kind of established that magic's a little more common, maybe this guy's doing parlor tricks with prestidigitation over in the corner. Maybe he's your quest
Ah,
giver.
maybe. So we have our tavern. We have a brazier with purple flames in it. Do you want to go with high magic or low magic, Nick?
Well, the thing is, we don't necessarily have to answer that yet from bottom up. Because we're still kind of establishing where we want to go, since we're coming at this as a brand new setting, then we can kind of see where it ends up. Because if we end up like adding more high magic stuff in the game, then we've decided basically intrinsically as part of our construction of this world that it's just kind of a thing. It's not something you have to decide right out the gate. Now, if you were doing the top-down approach, that would definitely be something you would want to consider before you do pretty much anything else. Would you agree?
I would say that that's accurate, and also another example that I think top down, Nick thinks bottom up. All
So,
right.
all right. So let's take a quick break from the actual world construction real fast, and let's discuss why that is. Because a big portion of how you design a world is which one you prefer. It's very clear that you prefer top down, and I prefer bottom up. But let's go
Yep.
into why that is. I like bottom up, preferably because I can do either one, and I've built worlds either way. But bottom up feels like Uh, it's more intimate that way, because you have like this. It's like when you're playing Minecraft. The top-down generation is the computer doing all the work to create the vast world that you go to play in. But the bottom-up construction is you got to build a house to survive the first night, and you got to stop them zombies from busting in.
Ah,
And
I
the
actually really like that analogy.
and
It's very interesting.
and the reason why I like bottom up a little bit more is because since you're thinking on a small scale, you don't have to worry about like the big implications later on. You don't have to like figure out the entire physics of the world because if somebody just starts off with top down, and you could go into a little bit more about this, um,
Hmm.
that to a lot of new players or new GMs, that's a little overwhelming.
Oh yeah. The first campaign that I ever created, I actually built bottom up, and it turned out pretty good. But I realized that when I was doing my creation, that the further up that I got, the more interesting the things kind of felt to me, and the broad strokes of changing the universe uh, felt more fun, I guess, as a GM, which is one of the reasons why when I start campaigns, sometimes I'll start them at 10th level simply by virtue of the fact that I like a lot of the power. I like a lot of the grand scale things. So the small tavern, while it's definitely important and a good starting place for a level 1 campaign, I've always felt like the power is where people want to get. So why not skip the boring stuff and kind of run there? But I've come to realize that there's a lot of differentiation between starting a character at level 1 versus level 10, because you are typically more invested if you start at level 1, and you have more time to plan, and you can alter things and kind of change your specs, so to speak.
And if you're like if you're messing with a world that you're building, you can make those like tweaks during the course of your construction, and you don't have to worry about it like impacting something on the other side of the globe because as of now that doesn't exist yet.
Yeah, that's good.
And as you build more and more like the cool stuff that you're thinking of, like in terms of the small scale, then if you moved from that tavern and go down the road a bit, we've kind of established that there's like a city maybe a few miles out.
All right.
So let's kind of like touch on that a little bit and see if we can connect the two together, because that's usually what I like to do. What is the connection? Immediately there's the road itself that connects the physical road from the tavern
Yep.
to the city. But before we get into the city, what are we going to call this tavern? What's the name of it?
Drowning tuna.
We're going to go with the Drowning Tuna. It's going to make an appearance here.
Absolutely. It should make an appearance everywhere, in my opinion.
All right, fine. We're gonna call it the Drowning Tuna. Located out in rolling plains that has nothing to do with seafood thus far, or any kind of fish. And despite calling it that, it doesn't really matter that the name, is an oxymoronic thing. It's just a cool name. So now that we have the Drowning Tuna out here in the middle of these plains, we have a cobblestone road that leads away from it towards this city. How big is the city? Is this like a town? Is this a huge metropolis? Is this like wandering into Baldur's Gate?
Huh. Well, because my brain works top down a lot, the first thing that came to my mind was, do I want this to be a grand kind of expanse where it's a powerful kingdom and all of those things? So I was like, if it's a small town, we're easing into it. If it's a big town, go crazy.
Do you want to go ahead and establish something like that? Because it sounds like you want this to be kind of a big sprawling thing, and we don't have to elaborate on that. You basically, this is kind of like setting the scale of the universe. So if you say like, yeah, this is maybe the capital of this country, and the country is vast, you can just leave it at that, and then you can elaborate on the
Huh.
rest of it later.
Okay. Well, you know what? I have always been a fan of get in there, it's gonna be hellacious. So yeah, how about a big port town, like huge?
Ooh, a big port
Yeah.
town. All right, cool. So we got a port town. That definitely means that there's what kind of port is it even? We can kind of elaborate on that a little bit. Is it maybe the port of a lagoon, or perhaps a bigger body of water like a sea, or perhaps an ocean?
Capitals don't typically exist along expansive bodies of water, but a lot of the time they do exist along rivers and things like that as easy supply lines. So we'll go with like a lake that is the end of a river that flows out
You're
to
gonna go
the
with the
sea,
lake?
and that's how they get their stuff in.
Okay, cool. Well, we got a huge town. This is the capital. You've
Yeah,
decided.
let's go with the capital. Gives them they can walk in and get a little bit of culture if they want to.
All right, cool.
Start to get a feel for the world that they're in.
And so here's our first connection point. So even though these two places are entirely independent of one another, in terms of the game, they're connected in that could explain why the Drowning Tuna has so much business, because everyone's leaving from the same road, coming out of this town, and after a few miles out for us with cars isn't too much, but a few miles out with those with horses or just on foot, that could be a good resting point at that time. So maybe the Drowning Tuna has just a constant flow of people moving in and out. Maybe some of them are staying the night. Maybe some of them are just pounding back a tankard of ale and then moving on down the road.
All right, sounds good to me. I think that much like anything in the world, now that we have our big capital city, what kind of place is it? It's a sprawling metropolis, so to speak. But is it a town in a human ran country? Is it ran by elves, tieflings? And that would help determine some of the architecture.
Well, let's actually start with a smaller question, and that's less about who runs the town and more about what kind of races can you find in there. Is this since it's Dungeons and Dragons? Are there just all the core races there? Are you going to find humans alongside elves alongside half-orcs, or is this just a human-dominated city, or perhaps a different race entirely? Maybe it's like a halfling port town or something.
Ooh, nice. Well, it comes back to another question I think that we asked at one point in time in one of our other podcasts was when you created a little bit of your plot and some of the culture, uh, maybe this game is going to have a lot of racial tensions. So maybe it's one race and they
Or
are
maybe,
kind of standoffish.
or maybe it's segregated.
Ooh, nice, nice. So they have an elven district and a human district, and so who runs the show?
Maybe it's not like even assigned districts. Maybe it's just which race is on top is my question first.
Ah, well, everybody puts humans on top in a lot of like video games, like the Dragon Age series and stuff like that. But you know what? I like to flip the script. Let dwarves on top. Dwarves are
Dwarves
the
on
dudes
top.
that run the show. Plains dwarves.
Okay, so is this maybe is it a lawful segregation, or is it just like it just so happens that the system kind of is tailored towards dwarves being top tier, and how does everyone else just kind of filter out? Maybe instead of being strictly segregated, it's the humans and elves and half elves live together because they're kind-ish close together, and they maybe live on the outskirts of the town, or maybe they're the ones who find themselves predominantly getting jobs at the harbor.
Ah, okay. Well, we can go with that.
Well, we don't even have to answer that question. The important part with bottom up construction is just asking the questions to start with. Because as long as you're thinking about it, you don't have to have concrete answers right away. Maybe since we're not even sure what the players are going to be playing, maybe you would want to change which race is on top based on the composition of your players. So if you have a group of 4 dwarves, then they would have a much different campaign than if you had a mishmash of everyone except dwarves.
Oh yeah, yeah, they would. We've actually ran into things like that where Latier is concerned, where the other races at the beginning of the game were considered less simply by virtue of the nation that we started the game in, but then by the end, closer to the end of the campaign, it was the humans that were the ones to watch out for and not trust, and so it all depends. You
And
can you can change things later.
even within Latir, with the capital of Elrond, did notice early on in the campaign, we were like level 1 to 3, that there was a certain level of segregation in there, but it was not systemic. It was not just like you have to be here, because you could find anybody anywhere, but you were going in the poorer side of town, you would find the races that just couldn't accumulate as much money because they weren't in government. They weren't the ones like who could go out and do all the adventuring and get all the mad stacks.
All right.
And if you're thinking along those lines, then it kind of helps you come up with more ideas, because that's really what a lot of this is about. Coming up with ideas that you think are cool and that you want to put in, because you can kind of fit whatever you want wherever you want. It's not really like putting a square block in a circular peg. You're the one who's shaping these to begin with. So you could just be like, you know what? This doesn't really work so well, but I kind of like the idea. So I like the color of the square block I'm trying to cram in here, but let's just, shave off the outer edges of it and make it round and shove it in there. It's still the color I want, but I made a small adjustment.
Since it's a large sprawling town, and get a good idea of dwarves are on top, or we haven't even decided that yet. Is this
Let's just go ahead and say dwarves are on top, but we haven't elaborated on that. We just know that, yeah, they're there.
All right. So is this a place where both the rich and the poor congregate? Is it a location that sees a lot of people coming in because there's conflict elsewhere, which would be indicated easily by just outside the city gates and the large wall that surrounds the city proper are shanty towns that have been cobbled together just to kind of keep the rain off the head for the people that are coming in from elsewhere.
All right, so we'll say there is a shanty town outside these city walls.
I like shanty towns. It's the best place to go and get like really cheap shit.
Hell yeah. And a question you might ask is, why is there a shanty town? Because you could just go with, yeah, there are poor people and they need somewhere to live, but maybe they are carrying some kind of disease and the dwarves are just not allowing them into the city. They still need a place to live, and there's a lot of landscape around that you could build on. So maybe this shanty town just is full of sick people, and then there's another plot point you could try solving. Maybe your players are heroic or like paladins or clerics, and they're like, let's solve this disease.
Let's go through this town and do lay on hands on everyone, see if we can fix it.
Or maybe their quest is to go adventure out into a further land because there's like this abandoned dungeon that they've heard about, and they need to pull like these magical supplies that if they bring them back to the shanty town, these items are powerful enough to just heal everybody without them having to go and individually try to treat them all. And then that also kind of ties into how magical this world is, which kind of sounds like it's pretty magical at this point.
So far, yeah. Let's say it's pretty magical. That's pretty cool. All right, so now you've got the big city, and
you got a big city. You also have a MacGuffin for your plot if you want.
Yeah, your players have made their way from their little tavern, and are going into the city to purchase supplies to go on their quest to save the shantytown. Do the dwarves let the player characters in? If they're all dwarves, it's pretty likely they just come on in. If they're not, do they hold any kind of prejudice? Do they think that they might be infected as well? Or
perhaps
infected?
whoever this tavern owner is a sympathizer who had like a relative who was a different race, and they know that it just sucks to be out there. So maybe they're willing to, even if maybe a good persuasion roll, maybe slide them a discount or something.
Yeah. All perhaps. So now you've got some questions to think about. What's the political climate? What's the economic climate of the location that you're in? Is there or is there not diseases? There's some games where disease never comes up unless you're fighting a monster that gives it to you.
Yep.
Where there are other campaigns that focus very heavily on disease and plague and things like that to create darker themes and create a little bit of tension amongst the poor versus the rich and things like that. Like, who can afford treatment for these things? And all of these questions are things that you eventually have to ask yourself.
Or maybe you don't. Maybe those questions are too overwhelming for you. Maybe that's not what you really want to think about. Maybe it doesn't matter what the political standpoint is of what's going on here. Like maybe the dwarves are on. Like if the dwarves are on top, you don't. Maybe you could just stop there for now and go do something else. Because Xander, I know you love to do this because it's just
I
the way you
do.
are. But this is obviously scaling to be pretty big at this point because you're asking these questions. But if that maybe too high level thinking for you for just creating like your first world, then maybe you could just stop there for now, let it sit on the back burner, and maybe cross the this cobblestone road, go beyond the tavern, and figure out what's beyond it. Are these maybe let's go back to just the terrain. The rolling plains, how far do they extend? Obviously, they don't extend too far in one direction because you're going to hit a river.
Yeah, and maybe they don't expand too far in the other direction because you're sitting close to the border of a change in kind of topography. Like you're about to hit the mountains, and that's the reason why the tavern's there in the first place. Because that climb is treacherous. Let me tell you.
Or if like once you get off, like once you've done the climb, then you got to have something where to take a break because you just fought through the elements and everything. Uh,
Mm-hmm.
oh wait, maybe so. There's like this just a huge mountain range at the end of these rolling plains that you have to cross unless you have high level magic or some other way to fly over it. Then you're pretty much stuck in. Oh man, we got to traverse this. So since this is a problem that is clear between like trade from this port town to somewhere else in the country, then maybe there's like a trail that it has been kind of blazed and cut out in one of these mountains, and it's a common one that people take all the time. That doesn't mean it's safe, but it does
No.
mean that the players at least have a direction of where they can go. Because if you
Mm-hmm.
point them to a road that winds up the mountain and like goes through like a pass and like a valley or whatever, then they know where they're going. They don't know what to expect while they're on the trail. Maybe as they're going through this mountain, that like mountain trolls who don't like all these travelers encroaching on their territory start hurling rocks down at them.
Or if you're starting out a level 1 campaign, the random encounter is something that's very powerful. When you get to, 6th, 7th, 8th level player characters, the random encounter kind of starts to peter off. But if this is a level 1 game, then a simple band of just guys in armor that like to try and take money and loot from people traveling along the road have set up a small encampment just off of the road, and they're demanding a toll or they'll kill you. So you've got to give them that.
Or we could even establish these guys as maybe this mountain range is actually the divide between two countries.
Ooh, nice.
I know we were going to start out with just one country, but maybe as you're building your world, you're like, maybe that isn't wide
Mm-hmm.
enough for what I want to do. So since this mountain range is like the border, maybe they're just border patrol. Maybe you straight up have to go through a checkpoint, check your gear. Do you have any illegal magic items?
Oh, nice.
And you pay the toll, or you figure out a way to sneak around. If you pay the toll, then your players are losing money, but they get to pass safely. And if they decide to go around, maybe there's some more dangerous stuff out there. Maybe there's a toll here for a reason because these guys they need to get paid to be out here in this dangerous ass
Mm-hmm.
environment.
So now we have the possibility of a large mountain range, which in real life help to provide physical boundaries. Because when countries and even states like here in the United States, physical boundaries are usually a good place to draw lines. Like a really good example here in Illinois, the Mississippi River cuts straight down the western coast of Illinois, and once you cross the river, you're in Missouri. So physical boundaries are always a good way to kind of create a physical place that you can express you're going from this location to another location, and the rules have changed and things have altered, sometimes slightly, sometimes massively. Like maybe this country that they're crossing into doesn't allow magic or mages, whereas the country that you're in currently, mages are everywhere. It just all depends.
One question that usually is a good way to differentiate what kind of country will accept what like magical thing or like idea is what their views on necromancy are.
Ooh, that's good.
Whether it might be all right for you to raise a skeleton army, for your personal manor because you own an estate and you need guards. But maybe conversely, maybe they're super paranoid about things that even might be considered necromancy, like resurrection spells. Like maybe they think that's really taboo, even though you're actually putting the soul of the person back into wherever they're supposed to be, like, and they're truly alive. Maybe they for some reason don't view it that way, or maybe you've changed it in your setting to have like some kind of ethereal decay or something else that would drive like a resurrected person mad.
Ooh, that's good. It could also be something as intense as uh, where if you're running a low magic campaign, a simple cantrip like using prestidigitation to clean your clothes is outlawed in a lot of places because mages are dangerous and they should not be trusted. So you have to try and pass through without stinging.
Oh, I have an idea. This is kind of a bigger scale thing, but what if there is some tension between the dwarven lands that we start out in and whatever this other country is, because the dwarven
Yeah,
lands, they're the area that's rich in magic and like items and stuff for the players to find, and the other side of the mountain is like freaking Mad Max or something
yeah.
like that, where everybody's scrapping to survive, and they're very envious of the guys on the other side of the mountain range. Maybe that's why they put up the toll to begin with. Maybe if you trade one of your magic items to get through, then their society now has an extra magic item that was really rare for them, but maybe not so much for you.
Yeah, like if something as simple as a health potion can make or break the difference between a guard living and a guard not living. And if they have low magic in this country versus high magic elsewhere, something like a potion or like say in the Underdark in Nick's campaign, light as in and of itself was a borderable trade. So torches are worth a lot more than gold coins because gold's everywhere. They're underground. Of course, they're going to find gold. So, kind of keeping in mind who and what is existing in these places can help you create tense moments for your players to kind of traverse through.
And as you're thinking of this, one of the ways I approach bottom up is I actually imagine you have a character, like whatever character it is, and they are the ones walking through this area. That's kind of why we've started at the tavern and then we effectively, quote unquote, walked to the capital city. So we could kind of, see what's going on there. But then before we got too deep into it, our character turns around, and because they don't have to rest, and they can sprint at the speed of light, they move all the way to the mountain range and figure out what's there too. So we've gone through the pass. We figured out that there's like a checkpoint here, that it's kind of a dangerous landscape. But I mean, people don't just go missing through this pass unless they try going around the toll booth. But what's on the other side of it? We've gotten through the mountain range. Is it a rocky mountainous area? Perhaps there's a lush forest or something else?
Well, because it's rare on resources that are of magic, it could also be rare on resources of other kinds as well. And much like the west coast of the United States, once you start to cross into the Rocky Mountains, there's a lot of desert plains, like in Nevada and New Mexico, where the rain kind of doesn't come to because it all gets dropped into the California crust. And that's the reason why it's lush and green there, but not so much elsewhere. So it could just be an expansive desert that they have to cross.
All right, expansive desert. That's what it's going to be on the other side. Um, so we have a cool desert, and we don't even have to go into what is in the desert yet. All we just know is that it's there. Um, and maybe as you're thinking of this, you're like, yeah, these are some really cool ideas and all. Like I like the terrain and I like mapping this stuff out, but I don't really know what to give the players to do because we've already thought of like a bunch of cool plot hooks for them to possibly do. But we're starting level 1. This is going to be a full campaign. I don't want to just shove all of this at them because then they're going to get analysis paralysis on all this shit that you're coming up with. Because you are what has been a systematic approach for you is suddenly you just dropping a whole tome of something on your players for when they see it. So why don't we just go back to that tavern, the Drowning Tuna that we started out at, and
All right.
so let's figure out who we're going to talk to. So I put down that there is that wizard doing tricks in the like somewhere in there, but it's very likely that one of the first people the players are going to talk to is probably the barkeep. So let's figure out who the barkeep is.
Hey, there we go. That's always fun. Barkeeps are one of my favorite NPCs to create because the players, because they've played D&D, and even if they haven't, they've played video games. And one of the tropes throughout, everything is that the barkeep is the guy that you talk to get information, to get, obviously you've got to talk to him to get a drink. Maybe he's the guy that is your quest giver.
Well, let's start by establishing what his point is before we elaborate on anything else, before we flesh this guy out, even before we know if he's a guy or not. What's his purpose? Is he the quest giver? Is he just somebody to share like some information about the world for the players, so that way they can actually ask about things in play and get that related response to it? Or is it something else? Maybe he's the bad guy.
He could be the bad guy. Let's think about him being a good guy, because introducing your players to the bad guy right off is cool for a twist. But
you don't want to do that for a bunch of new players, especially because then that'll just throw the hell out of everything.
So maybe he's a dwarf, or she is a dwarf. And
well, wait, hold on. But before you get into all that, so this barkeep's a good person. But what do they do?
Yeah. Well, beyond serve drinks, they provide
They provide services, yes, but for the game, is this guy going to send them on their first quest?
You know what? Let's go with yes.
All right, he's the first quest giver.
First quest giver.
So
he's got a little exclamation point above his head.
So now we can kind of go into more on this. And before I even come up with like the physical details or really any of their motivations, since this is the first quest giver, is this guy have a problem, like a personal problem that he wants to get resolved, or is this maybe a problem that he's heard about? Is this something like a legend, like a local legend? Like there's some kind of creature that stalks the plains at night, and it's got eyes that burn red as coal, but no one sees any other part of it. Or is it just something like there are rats in the basement?
Well,
big rats that are very aggressive and disease-ridden.
Since you're a new GM, there's nothing that says that you shouldn't lean on some tropes. That said, if you want to weave this particular NPC into the grander scheme of things, setting them on a quest to do something small, which will eventually evolve into something big. It could be, hey, I've got some rats down in the basement. If you kill them, I'll give you this map that is said to hold the secret to whatever kind of disease has been plaguing the residents of the shantytown next to the city that we're pretty close to. And if you can go there and get that cure, you'll have some allies.
Or maybe the barkeep himself is not aware of any of the further steps, but maybe as they go down there to like shank these rats, one of these rats is like a big ass dire rat that like gnaws its way out of the ground. And when they kill that, then the cleric or whoever else who has like medicine or something to roll the skill check, they discover that, wait a minute, this thing is carrying the lice that's causing the disease in the shantytown.
Ooh, nice.
So then you don't have somebody directly telling them what to do, but you're giving them more stages to the quest because they have the satisfaction that they've solved the tavern's problem. The barkeep, he's happy,
Yeah.
but there's bigger implications now.
Yep. So now you have now you have a quest line to follow. Do you have a large tunnel that happens to now connect to this tavern that wasn't there until the big bad rat kind of chewed his way through, or is it just a we need to investigate the shanty town and see if there are other rats and kind of follow them and figure out what's going on, which could lead to a really cool sewer adventure underneath the city, which are always fun and definitely a trope.
Or you could even just like the tunnel that the dire rat burrowed out of. How did it get there to begin with? Like maybe it didn't do all the work. Maybe since you got the idea of a sewer adventure going on, maybe in the sewers of the town, somebody who was trying to make some kind of maybe like a smuggling tunnel or route to like, and this is like a really long one, maybe that goes all the way to this tavern, maybe even all the way beyond, and basically trying to get through the mountain, so that way they can avoid the tolls, they can smuggle shit, and then maybe this is like a crime syndicate or something maybe smaller. Maybe it's just like a few people who are like, you know, I'm really fucking fed up of dealing with every time I go over this mountain, I have to pay like 25% of my profits in taxes, and I don't want that anymore. So you could decide to have like these basically the motivations of these people. You don't have to like elaborate on who they are yet, but just like are they evil or are they misguided good doers?
Yeah, like are they trying to get around an oppressive government that's basically trying to kick him in the teeth, or like are they Robin Hood or are they bandits, like bad guys?
Or perhaps they're the people of the shantytown who are diseased and they're like they found like a tunnel that connects to the sewers, and maybe when the rats got out of the sewers, that's how the whole disease started. Or if you don't even want to focus on that whole aspect of it, then maybe it's just somebody's trying to smuggle in the people from the shantytown into the city,
Oh yeah. So
like to get the medical attention or something.
yeah. Well, that's a good quest. And additionally, if you have good aligned players, or at least on the whole good aligned players, like everybody's good.
We're assuming that this is going to be like a general adventuring layout where you're not going to have somebody who's playing the chaotic evil jackass who just goes and stabs the barkeep right as the game
Or
starts.
the chaotic evil jackass who tricks his homies into helping him fulfill a prophecy and destroy half the freaking country.
To be fair, that took a lot of sessions and a lot of finagling to not have that blow up in my face.
Yeah, I can imagine.
I basically had to set up the game knowing Jesse was going to betray everybody. Because if that wasn't gonna be the thing, then I would have had to redo a lot of plot structure and everything.
Yeah. So anyway, you have a good aligned player base, and they want to help these people. And helping these people, you create a plot hook that plays on their human emotions as players, not characters, but players. It's not about gold. It's about doing the right thing for the sake of doing it. And when doing the right thing, usually there's reward that comes with it. So thinking about how you want to hook your players in to the storyline, keep in mind that you can definitely and absolutely play to the sort of emotional, the emotional conflict within the actual
Here,
player.
tugging on their heartstrings.
You can
That's
absolutely.
why. That's why I kept bringing up. That's why I kept trying to weave in like whether or not it's a legitimately evil force that they're going to be fighting, or if it's somebody who, when they finally take them out, like when they deliver that final blow, instead of killing them, they knock them out and find out that it was the dwarven doctor of the capital who is like, look, there's a serious issue going on outside. We need to solve this, and if you don't help me, government, then I'm gonna help them.
Yep, I'll do it on my own. So he's a criminal, and he's a quote unquote bad guy. Where the law is concerned, but he's doing things for the right reasons, and that can be all the difference.
That's right. Or you can even flip it on its like just flip that whole concept around, and instead he's like a Dr. Kevorkian kind of guy. Maybe he released the plague to see what it does.
Ooh, nice.
Maybe it's kind of like a Resident Evil Umbrella situation.
That's always fun. I mean, it created a franchise for a reason.
Yeah, you could go with either route, and you'd still have an interesting story. And you're gonna want to pick like whatever you want to go with based on what you think your players are gonna enjoy the most and what you're gonna enjoy running the most. If you have a bunch of new players and they're just not used to tabletop games, maybe don't introduce the morally like conflicting what do we do in this scenario thing. Maybe it's just a bad guy that they need to go stomp.
A bad guy that need to go stomp is always a good one.
But that's kind of further on down the line, since we have some big ideas here with our world, and we have a good base starting line of where it's kind of going to go and what we got already. We already know about this tavern. We definitely got away from making the barkeep. So let's polish this guy off and figure out like what exactly he is before we continue on with like bigger plots or whatever else is going on. So you want him to be a dwarf, right?
Yeah, let's make the guy a dwarf.
All right, and is he a guy or a girl?
Let's break the stereotype and go with it's a lady dwarf.
All right. Does this lady dwarf have a beard?
In this world, yes.
All right. All right, everybody's got a beard. That's always a classic dwarf trope. Where you look at somebody who's like, I can't tell who you are. I just know you're a dwarf. All right, so typical dwarf, like in terms of personality, or do we turn it on its head, like how in Latir I made dwarves somewhat seafaring into a certain degree? No, wait, that wasn't Latir. That was Seether Isle.
Well, considering it's a port town and there's a lot of ships that come in and out, let's say instead of being the miners beneath the mountain, we make them the captains of the seas, and that's their deal. Dwarves are seafaring people.
And when it comes to this kind of idea, you don't have to stick with every dwarf as seafaring because we all know that no one in any group is exactly alike. So, but you've kind of established that dwarves are generally seafaring, and you don't have to like hard stamp that onto your setting either. Maybe these dwarves are seafaring. Maybe you have a different set of dwarves that are the mining dwarves, or if you really wanted to get high fantasy, maybe you have the sky dwarves who like float around on propeller ships and air ships and bullshit like that.
Ooh, now that's cool.
But we don't want to solidify any of that in the setting yet because that's big. That's big thinking. Right now we're still just trying to figure out like what we want the universe to kind of be like. So instead of deciding on concretely on that, we'll ask a smaller question. Are there airships at all?
For the sake of simplicity,
Could there be?
For the sake of simplicity, at level 1, no, because
All right.
fuck flying.
No flying.
At least not until later. You guys all, if you listened to any of the podcasts before, flight is one of those game-breaking things, and when it comes around at like level 12 and 13, 14, 15, that's fine. That's when your characters, your players, should have the opportunity to kind of go around some of the bigger obstacles. But at level 1, you've got to have them traverse through the woods. You've got to have those random encounters. You have to create that foundation. And flight is one of those things that can completely undermine their ability to grow and level, because if they miss out on all of those little fights along the way, they won't build as quickly. That's the reason why in the Final Fantasy games you don't start out with an airship, but you get one eventually. Same kind of deal.
Also, if you're easing the players in from like level 1, you don't want them having to be overwhelmed by like, what do we do? Where do we go? Oh no, we're not even used to the setting yet. How do we make all these decisions? You could just keep that on the back burner for now, and you can just jot down that maybe I want something like this to happen in the future, but for now we're gonna say no. And pretty much with that, we have like the basis for an entire setting. You can even like start the game with nothing but a description, and you'd start them in this tavern and be perfectly good. Like in the windswept rolling plains of whatever this country's name is, you find yourselves in the Drowning Tuna, a squat tavern off the side of a cobblestone path, several miles away from the capital city of whatever the hell you call it. Within this tavern wall, we see the flickering of a purple flame as the light bounces off the wooden walls. It casts an eerie glow to the place that, despite being a somewhat eerie appearance, everyone knows who is in the tavern that means that Wizard Magic Face is there in town, and he's in the tavern and he's about to perform. And that's where we come on to your characters, where they are sitting in that circular table in the corner of the room, and as Magic Face starts to cast his prestidigitation, your own wizard scoffs at it and says, whatever, that's weak sauce, try this, and then like cast maybe a level 1 spell just out of spite to show everybody like how cool he is. And then from there, your players, and you'd like describe the barkeep, the dwarven woman who's standing behind it. Maybe that could be like a point of frustration for your half-orc barbarian who walks over to the counter and has to look really far down in order to just like see what's on the table. And so when the dwarven lady slams that tankard of ale on there, he like reaches down, picks he has to like crouch, pick it up, and then chug it. And right there, we have the start of a campaign.
You do indeed.
And now it's time to hear from you guys. Even though we didn't build on the top-down format, do you use either of these methods for world generation? Do you have your own method? Because we could always learn more. Be sure to subscribe to Starblade for more podcasts, and we'll see you next time on Playing God.
See you later.